All right, I got to bring my panel in on this one. Eli Stokel is the White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal and an MSNBC political analyst. Evan Siegfried, a Republican, a penguin enthusiast. I bet you didn't know that. And Jason Johnson, a politics editor at TheRoot.com and also an MSNBC political contributor. I'm sure you guys would guess this. Eli, we must start with President Trump's tweets. This morning specifically, retweeting a report from Fox News about North Korea. That comes from, wait for it, named sources sharing information that appears to be classified information. Hello, is this not what Jeff Sessions' Dog and Pony Show was all about on Friday? How the leakers will be prosecuted, this should never happen. I mean, what is this here?
Well, it's hypocrisy, but, you know, this is a president who's never, ever been capable of being shamed for hypocrisy, self-contradictions, any of that. So it's really not surprising. It fits this sort of pattern of, you know, Trump being, I've called him at times, a sort of a goldfish in the sense that he seems to forget what happened 10 seconds before. He's always in the moment just sort of reacting and trying to get reactions, and he doesn't really worry about whether or not it contradicts something he said before or a broader point. And obviously, you know, there have been a lot of stories over the last week about the new White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, trying to control the flow of information to this president, the news stories that get left on his desk, the things that he watches. Obviously, you can see from this morning's tweets, that's a huge challenge. You're not going to take this president away from his Twitter account, and you're probably not going to be able to get him to turn off Fox News, which is often what, you know, precipitates the tweets when he's reacting to what he sees on the television.
I'm pretty sure General Kelly is not going to start rooming with President Trump. Evan, I got to ask you about Trump's tweeting over and over about his base. And this does confuse me because he's not on the campaign trail anymore. The base is irrelevant. He's the president of the United States. And while his base might not ever abandon him, is the broader Republican Party. You've got a new CBS poll saying that Trump is going down. Then there's a CNN poll saying Republicans are feeling good about him. What is it, actually?
Well, first, to push back about General Kelly rooming with the president, he just needs to go on the DVR and set the parental controls. But in terms of Trump's obsession with the base, a base for any president is very important to get them fired up and get them to help in pushing momentum to pass key legislation. The president hasn't done that or activated his base to actually get things done in Washington. So he's actually talking about how his base is strong, and that makes his base feel good. But his base isn't strong. It's weak. It's crumbling. He won 67% of white non-college educated voters in November. He's got an approval rating that's abysmal there at 43. 50% of them disapprove. So it's a -7 rating. He's trying to do any and everything he can to get them up and get them psyched because they're not. They don't like what's going on.
When Republicans look at what the president has done, and when they feel good about it, when they say, look at Neil Gorsuch, for example, what does it say about the broader Republican Party that it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have the kind of government control and support that they do, yet the GOP and the president can't seem to get on the same page?
They've basically wasted the first 6 months because they can't figure out what they're doing, and half the important positions haven't even been filled yet. And
I mean, executive orders,
right? You know, those
you don't need
really
anybody else.
Yeah, you can just those are perfect for memes, but those aren't necessarily getting the job done. I think the other issue here is that if you look at this health care vote, right, the real value of the president's base when you're trying to push through legislation is I can call on that 30 to 40% in your state to pressure you. It didn't work against John McCain. It didn't work against Mikulski. It didn't work against Susan Collins. So he hasn't even been able to rally his base to get Congress to do what he wants. And that is a sign of an absolutely ineffective president. Maybe he'll change down the road.
Congress, Republican Congress.
Exactly. Can't even get them to move.
Eli, I want to ask you about the New York Times report that was leaked, this climate change report. Do you think the scientists jumped the gun here? The White House didn't even have the opportunity to release it. Why not give the White House the opportunity? And if they don't do it, then you've got a case to make. Here, they leak their own jam.
Well, it's a fair question, and I think it's pretty obvious that the reason that these scientists went to the New York Times is because they don't trust this White House not to suppress the report or to validate it. They are worried about this White House sort of having its head in the sand on climate change. And as Peter mentioned at the top of the hour, you know, go back to June in that briefing room, and after the president withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Accord on climate change, there were a lot of questions about the president's personal views on whether or not climate change is caused by humans. And over and over and over again, the answer from Sean Spicer was, I haven't had a chance to talk to the president about that. Just not really believable, right? You see the president every day. You work in the West Wing. If you wanted to get us an answer for that question, you would. And there's been no transparency from the White House, which can only lead you to believe that this is not a White House that is all that worried about the threat of climate change. And obviously, given how serious that threat is, according to this draft report and these scientists, you can kind of understand why they may have wanted to make this public rather than going the sort of normal route and quietly sending this over to the White House and waiting for the administration to act.
Let's just think about that. Put that into context. These are scientists who are saying we need to get this out there. Last week, Evan, you, a Republican, wrote that this White House is short on competence, and you said it was a rudderless ship. Yet there are a lot of competent people in the White House. General Kelly, he's competent, as is H.R. McMaster. What's the problem? The president?
Well, it is partially the president, but it's also some of the things that they've been doing, they haven't been doing on the legislative side to get things done. So let's take all these theme weeks the White House has. Energy Week, Made in America Week, etc.
American heroes.
Yes. And I think that when you go out and have those, if you're a normal or a Republican or Democratic administration, on the first day of that week, you have a member of the Senate and a member of the House introducing legislation that does something toward that goal of whatever the theme is. And it's voted on by that Wednesday or Thursday, and the president signs it into law.
But they don't decide on these dream weeks until 2 days before.
That's
the
part of
president
it.
himself barely supports him. He might go to an event at the White House, but look at the president's Twitter traction during those weeks. He barely acknowledges it.
Not to mention the fact that, the weeks don't necessarily match the announcements. So last week we had, Sessions saying we're going to sue colleges for discriminating against white people, and you have Stephen Miller come out and say we're going to try and cut illegal immigration after President Trump says that we're going to, encourage police brutality. What kind of theme week was that? Because that certainly wasn't the kind of theme. It's like, it's not the kind of theme that any president would actually want the American people to see, and that's part of the problem. Their internal communications are terrible. Their external communications are terrible. And when you have a president who can't stay on message, it's impossible for anybody else to do their job.
It's also a big problem because the president hasn't outlined a long-term foreign policy vision. Look at what happened over the weekend with North Korea. You had Rex Tillerson saying there was no military option, Nikki Haley saying everything's on the table, and everybody's undercutting each other because there is no strong leadership at the top. The president hasn't outlined that vision, and so they're improvising.
All right, I want to get my panel to weigh in. Jason, let's start with you. Possible airstrikes in the Philippines, and it's not like dozens more troops, it's just dozens more Marines in Afghanistan. Are we not missing a strategy? If I were a Marine making my way into Afghanistan, I'd sure as hell want to know the game plan.
Yeah, we haven't had a strategy in Afghanistan for years. This goes back to the prior administration. We have...
but the prior administration said, this is complicated, let me pull back.
They did start to pull back, but they still weren't going to pull out completely.
True.
Which the president is rumored to be wanting to do because he's gotten frustrated with Defense Secretary Mattis and General McMaster. And he was saying, well, listen, you guys are doing this review, and it's just like when that time the 21 Club restaurant had a review too, and they came back with nothing. He's dissatisfied because he doesn't get something that is a black and white, simple decision.
Ask
War
the waiters, not the consultants, cannot be the answer when you're talking about this sort of geopolitics.
Look, this is a clear example of why, like, the travel ban and the Muslim ban doesn't make sense. Because ISIS is not just a Middle Eastern problem with brown Muslim people. It's all over the world. And we have to be much more sophisticated in how we battle it. And here's the thing. I also think this is problematic because this is an example of one dictator being helped by someone who wants to be a dictator down the road. Duarte is a problem. He is a human rights violator par excellence. Everyone on the planet has said, look, this guy brags about judicial killings. I mean, you have a president
by his own hands.
By his own hands, who's like, I killed him myself. It's like a Jim Webb sort of thing. So you really have to be careful when you're dealing with providing military support to that kind of leader, because he's definitely going to use it to go against his internal political enemies.
I don't think he's going to use U.S. drones and U.S. drone strikes to take out his own political enemies. I think the U.S. is going to be a little more careful in who they use or who they drop.
The possibility that we would have to work with them and determine, hey, where do we have to fight? Where do we have to bomb? You don't think Duarte is going to try and use that to his advantage? I mean, the United States, we're in their territory. We're asking for their assistance. And that's part of the problem with working with those kinds of dictators. Even if you're fighting ISIS, we have to be clear and present about the kind of people that we're allying with.
All right, we have to leave it there.